The helicopter's rotors cut through the thick Afghan air as it descended toward the forward operating base. Inside, Navy SEAL Team Alpha sat in tense silence, their faces painted with camouflage and exhaustion. The mission had gone sideways fast, and now they were returning with wounded brothers and heavy hearts. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison pressed his hand against the bandage on his shoulder, feeling the warm blood seeping through. Across from him, Petty Officer First Class Tony Rodriguez winced as he shifted his weight, his leg wrapped in makeshift tourniquets. The explosion had caught them off guard during their extraction, and shrapnel had found its mark on several team members. "Base is 2 minutes out," the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. "Medical team is standing by." Jake nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. This was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission in the Kunar province, but nothing in Afghanistan was ever routine. The Taliban had been waiting for them, almost as if they knew exactly where the SEALs would be. 3 of his men were injured, and they were lucky no one was coming home in a body bag. As the helicopter touched down, a cloud of dust swirled around them. Jake could see the medical team rushing toward them, but something was different about today's response. Usually, Doc Peterson would be the first one out, his gray hair and weathered face a familiar sight after difficult missions. Instead, a smaller figure in medical fatigues approached the aircraft. "Who's that?" Rodriguez asked, squinting through the dust and afternoon sun. Jake shook his head. He didn't recognize the medic either. As the figure drew closer, he realized it was a woman, her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail beneath her medical cap. She moved with purpose and confidence, her medical bag slung over her shoulder as she reached the helicopter. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen," she said, her voice cutting through the noise of the rotors as they began to wind down. "I need to assess your injuries immediately." The SEALs exchanged glances. Female medical personnel weren't uncommon on base, but most of the forward operating bases in this region were predominantly male. Something about her presence felt different. Though Jake couldn't put his finger on what it was, Dr. Chen climbed into the helicopter without hesitation, her hands already reaching for Rodriguez's wounded leg. "What happened?" she asked Jake while examining the tourniquet. "IED during extraction," Jake replied, watching as she worked with practiced efficiency. "Tony took the worst of it, but we've all got some shrapnel." Her hands moved with remarkable steadiness as she checked Rodriguez's pulse and examined his wounds. There was something about the way she handled herself that impressed Jake. Most medical personnel, while highly trained, showed at least some signs of nervousness when dealing with wounded special operations forces. Dr. Chen seemed completely at ease. "We need to get him to the medical tent immediately," she said, signaling to the other medics waiting nearby. "The tourniquet is holding, but I need to examine the wound more thoroughly." As they began moving Rodriguez onto a stretcher, Jake noticed something that made him pause. When Dr. Chen lifted Rodriguez's leg to position it properly, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing what looked like scar tissue on her forearm. It wasn't the kind of scarring you'd expect from medical school or civilian accidents. It looked like combat wounds. The other SEALs had noticed it too. Master Chief Petty Officer Sam Williams, the team's senior enlisted member, was staring at Dr. Chen with a puzzled expression. Williams had been in the Navy for over 20 years and had seen his share of combat medics, but something about this woman was triggering his instincts. "Ma'am," Williams said as they carried Rodriguez toward the medical facility, "if you don't mind me asking, where did you serve before this assignment?" Dr. Chen's step didn't falter, but Jake caught the slightest hesitation before she answered. "Various locations," she said simply. "Right now my focus is on getting your teammate stabilized." It was a deflection, and every SEAL in the group recognized it. They were trained to read people, to pick up on the subtle signs that someone was holding back information. Dr. Chen was clearly skilled at avoiding direct answers, which only made them more curious about her background. Inside the medical tent, Dr. Chen worked with remarkable efficiency. She had Rodriguez on the examination table within minutes, cutting away his pants leg to get a better look at the wound. Her movements were precise and confident, showing none of the hesitation that might be expected from someone new to treating combat injuries. "This is going to hurt," she warned Rodriguez before beginning to clean the wound. "But I need to remove some of this debris before I can properly assess the damage." Rodriguez gritted his teeth and nodded. As Dr. Chen worked, Jake found himself studying her more closely. There was something in her eyes, a look he'd seen before in the faces of people who had been through combat. It was a kind of awareness, a constant scanning of the environment that came from spending time in dangerous places. "Doctor," Rodriguez said through gritted teeth, "you've done this before, haven't you? This isn't your first time treating combat wounds." Dr. Chen paused for just a moment, her hands still working on cleaning the wound. "I've had some experience with trauma medicine," she said carefully. Williams stepped closer to the examination table. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's not what he's asking. We can tell the difference between someone who's treated car accident victims and someone who's treated combat casualties. You've seen combat." The tent fell silent except for the sound of Rodriguez's labored breathing and the distant noise of helicopters in the background. Dr. Chen continued working, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. "My background isn't important right now," she said finally. "What's important is getting you all patched up so you can return to duty." But Jake knew that wasn't the end of it. His team was curious now, and when SEALs got curious about someone, they didn't just let it go. There was clearly more to Dr. Sarah Chen than met the eye, and Jake had a feeling that before long, they were going to find out exactly what she was hiding. As Dr. Chen finished cleaning Rodriguez's wound and began suturing, Jake made a mental note to do some checking of his own. Something told him that their new medic had a story worth knowing. 3 days had passed since Dr. Chen had treated the wounded SEALs, and Jake found himself thinking about her more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just professional curiosity anymore. There was something about the way she had handled herself under pressure that reminded him of his own team members. The same calm efficiency, the same ability to compartmentalize emotions and focus on the task at hand. Jake was making his way to the mess hall when he spotted Dr. Chen sitting alone at a corner table, picking at her food while reading what looked like medical journals. Even during her downtime, she maintained that same alertness he'd noticed in the medical tent. Her eyes periodically swept the room, taking in faces and exits in a way that was distinctly military. "Mind if I join you?" Jake asked, approaching her table with his tray. Dr. Chen looked up, and for just a split second, Jake saw something flash across her face. Wariness, maybe, or resignation. "Of course, Lieutenant Commander. How's your shoulder healing?" Jake sat down across from her, noting how she positioned herself to keep her back to the wall and maintain a clear view of the room's entrances. "It's fine, thanks to your work. Call me Jake." "Sarah," she replied, though she seemed uncomfortable with the informality. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Jake decided to test the waters. "The guys have been talking about you," he said casually. "They're impressed with your skills. Rodriguez says you've got the steadiest hands he's ever seen on a medic." Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I'm glad I could help. Where did you train?" Jake asked, trying to sound conversational. "Your technique is different from most of the medical personnel we've worked with." Sarah set down her fork and met his eyes directly. "Lieutenant Commander, I appreciate your interest, but my background really isn't relevant to my job here." Jake held her gaze. "Actually, it is. When my team's lives are in your hands, everything about you becomes relevant. We trust our medics with our lives, and that trust is built on knowing who they are and what they're capable of." Something shifted in Sarah's expression. For a moment, the careful mask slipped, and Jake saw a flash of something that looked like pain. "You're right," she said quietly. "Your team deserves to know who's treating them." She was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "I was Army before this. Special operations. I did 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan before I decided to focus on medicine." Jake felt pieces clicking into place. "What unit?" "That's classified," Sarah said, but there was no hostility in her voice now, just resignation. "Let's just say I understand what you and your team go through out there. I've been there myself." Before Jake could respond, Rodriguez appeared at their table, walking with a slight limp but moving much better than he had 3 days ago. "Doc Chen." "Mind if I interrupt?" Sarah gestured to the empty chair. "How's the leg feeling, Tony?" "Like new, thanks to you." Rodriguez sat down and studied Sarah with open curiosity. "Jake, you should have seen her yesterday. One of the Marines came in with a gunshot wound, and she had him stabilized and prepped for surgery faster than I've ever seen. Moved like she'd done it 100 times before." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "I was just doing my job." "No," Rodriguez said, shaking his head. "That wasn't just medical training. That was combat experience. I've been in this business long enough to know the difference." Williams appeared at their table as if summoned, carrying his own tray. Mind if I join this little gathering? Without waiting for an answer, he sat down and fixed Sarah with his penetrating stare. Doc, I've been doing some thinking since the other day. Sarah tensed slightly. Oh? 23 years in the Navy, Williams continued. And I've worked with a lot of medical personnel. Combat medics, flight surgeons, Navy docs, you name it. But I've only seen that particular combination of skills and instincts in one type of person. Jake watched as Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She was preparing for something. You weren't just Army Special Operations, Williams said quietly. You were downrange. Combat operations. Multiple deployments. And based on those scars on your arms and the way you handle yourself, I'm guessing you saw some serious action. The mess hall continued buzzing around them, but their table had fallen into complete silence. Sarah stared at Williams for a long moment, and Jake could see her making some kind of internal calculation. Master Chief, she said finally, you're very perceptive. It's my job to be perceptive, Williams replied. Question is, why is someone with your background working as a base medic? This seems like a step down for someone with your skills. Sarah pushed her tray away, her appetite apparently gone. Sometimes people need a change of pace. Rodriguez leaned forward. Doc, with all due respect, people don't usually go from special operations to base medical unless something happened. Something big. Jake could see the walls going back up around Sarah. Her posture straightened and that professional mask was sliding back into place. Gentlemen, I appreciate your concern, but my reasons for being here are personal. Fair enough, Jake said, sensing that pushing further would only cause her to retreat completely. But I want you to know that whatever brought you here, we're glad you're with us. Your skills have already saved lives. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Thank you. That means more than you know. Williams wasn't ready to let it go entirely. Doc, I'm not trying to pry into your personal business, but this is a dangerous place. And knowing what our people are capable of can mean the difference between life and death. If you've got combat experience, that could be valuable information for all of us. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I can handle myself in a combat situation if that's what you're asking, but I'm here to heal people, not to hurt them. The way she said it made Jake think there was a story there, probably a painful one. He found himself wanting to know more about what had driven her from special operations to medicine. But he could see that pushing for more information now would be a mistake. Well, Rodriguez said, breaking the tension. All I know is that my leg feels great, and I'll be ready for the next mission thanks to you. That's enough for me. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since Jake had met her, it seemed genuine. Just make sure you follow the physical therapy routine I gave you. And no heavy lifting for at least another week. Yes, ma'am, Rodriguez said with a grin. As the conversation shifted to lighter topics, Jake found himself studying Sarah again. She was relaxing slightly, but he could still see that underlying tension, that constant state of readiness that marked someone who had seen too much combat. Whatever had happened to bring her here, he had a feeling it was going to be an interesting story when it finally came out. The attack came at dawn, just as the base was beginning to stir to life. Jake was in the communications tent reviewing intelligence reports when the first mortar round landed near the perimeter fence. The explosion shook the ground and sent him diving for cover as alarms began wailing across the compound. Incoming! Incoming! The shouts echoed across the base as more rounds began falling. Jake grabbed his gear and weapon, his mind automatically shifting into combat mode. Through the tent's opening, he could see soldiers and Marines running for defensive positions as dust and smoke filled the air. The second round landed closer, near the motor pool, and Jake felt the concussion wave wash over him. This wasn't a random harassment attack. The rounds were falling in a pattern, walking across the base with deadly precision. Someone was directing this fire with intimate knowledge of the base layout. Jake sprinted toward his team's ready room, dodging debris and scrambling personnel. He found Williams and Rodriguez already gearing up, their faces grim but focused. What's the situation? Jake asked, checking his weapon and grabbing his tactical vest. Coordinated attack, Williams replied, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. Mortars from the ridgeline to the north, and we're getting reports of small arms fire from multiple directions. They've got us bracketed. Rodriguez finished loading magazines into his vest. Base defense is mobilizing, but they're going to need all hands on this one. This isn't just a probe. They're coming hard. Another explosion rocked the base, this one close enough to rattle their teeth. Through the ready room's window, Jake could see smoke rising from what looked like the administrative building. The attackers were targeting key infrastructure, trying to disrupt communications and command functions. "Let's move," Jake said. "We need to get to the command post and see where we can do the most good." They ran across the compound in tactical formation, using buildings and equipment for cover as mortar rounds continued to fall around them. Jake's mind was cataloging the damage as they moved. The communications antenna was down, one of the fuel storage areas was burning, and he could see bodies lying motionless near the main gate. Halfway to the command post, they heard a different sound cutting through the chaos. Automatic weapons fire close and getting closer. The small arms attack was beginning. "They're inside the perimeter," Rodriguez said, pointing toward the eastern section of the base where muzzle flashes were visible between buildings. Jake was about to respond when he saw something that made his blood run cold. A group of insurgents had breached the perimeter near the medical facility. They were moving methodically, clearing buildings as they advanced toward the main medical tent where wounded personnel would be most vulnerable. "The medical facility," Jake said. "They're going after the wounded." Williams followed his gaze and cursed. "Dr. Chen and the medical staff are sitting ducks in there." Without hesitation, Jake changed direction. "We're going to the medical facility. We can't let them get to our wounded." They sprinted toward the medical complex, Jake's mind racing. The insurgents had chosen their targets well. The medical facility was always one of the most lightly defended areas on any base, staffed primarily with medical personnel who were focused on healing rather than fighting. If the attackers reached the wounded soldiers and medical staff, it would be a massacre. As they approached the medical tent, Jake could hear gunfire from inside the complex. Someone was fighting back, but the sound of automatic weapons fire suggested they were heavily outgunned. "Side entrance," Williams said, pointing to a smaller entrance that would give them a tactical advantage. "We can flank them if they're focused on the main tent." They moved in tactical formation, Jake taking point as they approached the side of the medical facility. Through the canvas walls, he could hear voices shouting in Pashto, and the unmistakable sound of someone returning fire with what sounded like a pistol. Jake signaled his team to stop as they reached the entrance. He could hear at least 3 different voices inside, all speaking in urgent, clipped sentences. The insurgents were searching for something or someone specific. The sound of the pistol fire came again, followed by angry shouting. Someone inside was putting up a fight, but pistol rounds against assault rifles was not a sustainable battle. Jake held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. On his signal, they burst through the entrance. The scene inside the tent was chaos. 2 insurgents were advancing on the main treatment area, where several wounded soldiers lay on gurneys, unable to move or defend themselves. A 3rd attacker was focused on someone behind an overturned medical cabinet, who was returning fire with what Jake could now see was indeed a pistol. Jake and his team opened fire immediately. The element of surprise was total, and 2 of the insurgents went down before they could react. The 3rd spun toward them, raising his rifle, but Williams put 2 rounds center mass before the man could get a shot off. As the gunfire faded, Jake heard a familiar voice from behind the overturned cabinet. "Cease fire! Friendly, I'm coming out." Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from behind the cabinet, a smoking pistol in her hands and her medical coat torn and bloodstained. But it was the way she moved that caught Jake's attention. She moved like a soldier, weapon ready, checking corners and maintaining situational awareness even as she holstered her sidearm. "Area secure," she called out, using military terminology that no civilian medical personnel would know. Jake stared at her in amazement. "Sarah, are you hit?" She shook her head, immediately moving to check on the wounded soldiers who had been trapped in their beds during the attack. "I'm fine, but we need to get these patients moved to a more secure location. This position isn't defensible if they come back with more people." Williams was checking the bodies of the insurgents when he called out, "Jake, you need to see this." Jake moved to where Williams was kneeling beside one of the attackers. In the man's pocket, Williams had found a crude map of the base with specific buildings marked in red ink. The medical facility was clearly marked, along with what appeared to be patrol routes and guard positions. "This was targeted," Williams said grimly. "They knew exactly where to hit us." Jake looked back at Sarah, who was helping move a wounded Marine onto a stretcher with the efficiency of someone who had done it many times before. "Sarah, how many rounds did you fire?" She looked up, meeting his eyes. 7. Rodriguez did a quick count of the insurgents and the wounds they'd taken from her pistol fire. 3 targets, 7 rounds fired. 2 confirmed hits before we arrived. He looked at Jake with raised eyebrows. That's some impressive shooting under pressure. Sarah finished securing the wounded Marine and stood up, brushing dust from her uniform. We need to focus on getting these patients evacuated. I can answer questions later. But Jake was beginning to realize that Dr. Sarah Chen was full of surprises, and he was starting to understand that whatever her background was, it was probably more impressive than any of them had imagined. The way she had handled herself in combat, her tactical awareness, her marksmanship under pressure. This wasn't just someone with medical training who happened to be brave. This was someone who had been trained to fight. The base was secure by noon, but the aftermath of the attack left everyone on edge. 12 wounded, 3 dead, and significant damage to critical infrastructure. Jake found himself in the temporary command post, debriefing with the base commander about the morning's events. The medical facility was definitely a priority target, Colonel Martinez said, studying the map they'd found on one of the insurgents. If Dr. Chen hadn't been there to coordinate the defense of the wounded, we could have lost a lot more people. Jake nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept thinking about the way Sarah had moved during the attack, the precision of her shooting, and the tactical vocabulary she'd used without thinking. "Sir, what do we know about Dr. Chen's background?" Colonel Martinez looked up from the map. "Why do you ask?" "Because she fought like someone with extensive combat training today. More than just basic military medical training. A lot more." The colonel was quiet for a moment, then reached for a secured filing cabinet. "Her file is classified, but given what happened today, I think you have a right to know." He pulled out a thick folder and handed it to Jake. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room." Jake opened the folder and felt his eyes widen as he read. Dr. Sarah Chen wasn't just former Army Special Operations. She was former Delta Force. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, and a service record that read like a textbook on Special Operations excellence. "Jesus," Jake breathed, scanning the pages. "She was a combat medic with Delta?" "One of the best they ever had," Colonel Martinez confirmed. "But look at the end of her file." Jake flipped to the final pages and found what the colonel was referring to. Sarah's last mission had gone catastrophically wrong. Her entire team had been killed in an ambush, and she had been the sole survivor. The mission report was heavily redacted, but Jake could read between the lines. Sarah had fought her way out of a hopeless situation, keeping herself alive through 3 days of being hunted by enemy forces. She was awarded the Silver Star for her actions during that mission, Colonel Martinez said quietly. But she also lost 12 teammates, including her medical partner who she'd worked with for 2 years. Jake felt pieces falling into place. The sadness he'd seen in her eyes, her reluctance to talk about her past, her transition from combat operations to purely medical work. She was carrying survivor's guilt, probably blaming herself for coming home when her teammates didn't. She requested transfer to non-combat medical duties immediately after her recovery, the colonel continued. Said she was done with special operations. The Army tried to convince her to stay, but she was adamant. She wanted to save lives, not take them. Jake closed the file, understanding now why Sarah had seemed so familiar to him. She moved like his own team members because she had been one of the elite, trained to the same standards, tested by the same crucible of combat that forged all special operations personnel. "Sir, does she know that we know?" "I doubt it. Her file was classified when she arrived, and she's never volunteered any information about her background. I suspect she prefers it that way." Jake was about to respond when Williams appeared in the doorway of the command post. "Sir, sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation at the medical facility." They followed Williams across the compound to where a crowd had gathered outside the medical tent. Inside, Jake could hear raised voices and what sounded like an argument. "What's going on?" Jake asked. Rodriguez appeared from inside the tent, shaking his head. "Dr. Chen is refusing to let anyone treat her injuries from this morning's fight. Says she's fine and that the wounded take priority." Jake frowned. "What injuries?" "Shrapnel from when those insurgents blew a hole in the tent wall," Rodriguez explained. "She's got metal fragments in her left arm and shoulder, but she won't stop working long enough to let anyone look at them." Jake pushed through the crowd and entered the medical tent. He found Sarah working on a wounded Marine, her left arm visibly bloodied and her movements more careful than usual. Dr. Peterson, the base's senior medical officer, was standing nearby looking frustrated. "Dr. Chen," Jake said, approaching her workstation, "I need to speak with you." Sarah didn't look up from her patient. "I'm busy, Lieutenant Commander." "It wasn't a request," Jake said firmly. "Doc Peterson, can someone else take over here?" Dr. Peterson nodded gratefully. "Corman Williams can finish the sutures." Sarah finally looked up, and Jake could see pain in her eyes that she was trying hard to hide. "I said I'm fine." "No, you're not." Jake gestured to her bloodied arm. "You're injured and you're going to get yourself treated. That's an order." For a moment, Jake thought Sarah might argue further, but something in his tone must have convinced her. She stripped off her bloodied gloves and allowed Dr. Peterson to guide her to an examination table. As Dr. Peterson began cleaning her wounds, Jake pulled up a chair beside the table. "Why won't you let people help you?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling as Dr. Peterson worked. "Because taking care of other people is easier than taking care of myself." "That's not an answer." Sarah turned to look at him, and Jake could see tears forming in her eyes. "Because every time I stop moving, every time I sit still long enough to think, I remember what happened to my team. I remember that I'm alive when they're not." Dr. Peterson paused in his work, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional conversation happening around him. Jake waved him on and leaned closer to Sarah. "How many?" he asked quietly. 12, Sarah whispered. 12 good soldiers who trusted me to keep them alive, and I failed them. Jake felt his heart clench. He'd lost teammates before, and he knew the crushing weight of survivor's guilt. "Sarah, you didn't fail them. You survived. Sometimes that's all any of us can do." "I was supposed to be their medic," Sarah said, tears now flowing freely. "I was supposed to keep them alive, and I couldn't save any of them. Not one." Dr. Peterson finished cleaning her wounds and began removing shrapnel fragments. Sarah didn't even flinch as he worked. Her pain tolerance clearly developed through experience with much worse injuries. "Tell me what happened," Jake said gently. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, and Jake thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "We were extracting a high-value target in Helmand Province. Intelligence said it was a routine snatch and grab, but it was a trap. They were waiting for us." She paused, swallowing hard. "The building we entered was rigged with explosives. The blast killed half my team instantly. The rest of us fought our way out, but we were surrounded. 12 hours of running and fighting, watching my teammates get picked off one by one." Jake could see the pain in her face as she relived the memories. "How did you survive?" "Luck," Sarah said bitterly. "Pure stupid luck. I found a cave system that led to an old smuggling tunnel. Spent 3 days crawling through underground passages while they hunted for me above ground. When I finally made it to friendly territory, I was the only one left." Dr. Peterson finished his work and began bandaging her arm. "You're going to need to take it easy for a few days," he said professionally. "Those were some deep fragments." Sarah nodded absently, still lost in her memories. Jake reached over and took her uninjured hand. "Sarah, look at me." When she met his eyes, he continued, "What happened to your team wasn't your fault. You did everything you could, and you survived to honor their memory by saving other people. That's not failure, that's purpose." For the first time since he'd met her, Sarah's carefully constructed walls finally came down completely, and she began to cry in earnest. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah had finally opened up about her past, and Jake noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. She was still dedicated to her medical work, but some of the rigid tension that had defined her seemed to be easing. She had started joining his team for meals more frequently, and occasionally Jake even caught her smiling at Rodriguez's terrible jokes. The morning briefing brought news that would test all of them. Intelligence had located a high-value target in a compound 15 kilometers north of the base. The target was believed to be the insurgent leader who had coordinated the attack on their base 2 weeks earlier. "This is a time-sensitive mission," Colonel Martinez explained to the assembled special operations personnel. "We have a narrow window before the target moves to a new location. Team Alpha will conduct the primary assault, with Team Bravo providing overwatch and extraction support." Jake studied the intelligence photos and tactical map. The compound was isolated but well defended, situated on high ground with clear fields of fire in all directions. It was going to be a challenging mission even under the best circumstances. "Medical support?" Jake asked. Standard procedure, the colonel replied. Combat medic will accompany the assault team, with additional medical personnel standing by at the extraction point. Jake glanced toward the back of the briefing room where Sarah was standing with the other medical personnel. Her face was carefully neutral, but he could see the tension in her posture. She was thinking the same thing he was. This mission profile was uncomfortably similar to the one that had killed her Delta Force team. After the briefing, Jake found Sarah in the medical facility, methodically checking and rechecking her medical supplies. Her movements were precise but mechanical, like someone going through familiar motions while their mind was elsewhere. Penny for your thoughts, Jake said. Approaching her workstation, Sarah looked up, and Jake could see the internal struggle in her eyes. Just making sure everything is ready. Sarah, you don't have to go on this mission. We can request a different medic. She stopped what she was doing and met his gaze directly. Is that what you want? Jake considered his answer carefully. What I want is the best possible medical support for my team. And objectively speaking, you're the most qualified combat medic on this base. But I also don't want to put you in a situation that's going to bring back painful memories. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. Jake, I've been running from those memories for 8 months. Every time I close my eyes, I see my teammates dying. Every time I hear gunfire, I'm back in that compound in Helmand Province. She looked up at him with determination in her eyes. Maybe it's time to stop running. Jake felt a mix of admiration and concern. Are you sure? There's no shame in saying you're not ready. I'll never be ready, Sarah said simply, but your team deserves the best medical support available, and despite everything that's happened, I'm still good at what I do. Williams appeared in the doorway of the medical facility. Jake, we're wheels up in 30 minutes. Final equipment check. Jake nodded, then turned back to Sarah. If you're coming with us, I need to know that you can handle it. I can't have you freezing up when my team's lives are on the line. Sarah's expression hardened with resolve. I won't let you down. 25 minutes later, Jake found himself in the back of a Black Hawk helicopter, watching the Afghan landscape pass below. His team was in full combat gear, weapons checked and ready. Sarah sat across from him, her medical pack secured beside her and her sidearm holstered on her thigh. She was staring out the window, but Jake could see that she was mentally preparing herself for what was to come. Rodriguez leaned over and tapped Sarah's shoulder. Hey, Doc, you okay? Sarah turned to him with a small smile. I'm good, Tony, just thinking. Well, stop thinking so hard, Rodriguez grinned. We've got this. In and out, quick and clean. Jake appreciated Rodriguez's attempt to lighten the mood, but he could see that Sarah's mind was elsewhere. He'd seen that same look on the faces of soldiers returning to combat after traumatic experiences. The determination was there, but so was the fear. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 5 minutes to insertion point. Check your gear and prepare for fast rope deployment. Jake's team went through their final preparations with practiced efficiency. Sarah checked her medical supplies one last time, then secured her pack and prepared her fast rope gear. Her movements were smooth and professional, showing no signs of hesitation. Remember, Jake said over the comm, this is intelligence gathering first, direct action second. We get in, confirm the target, and call for extraction. No unnecessary risks. The helicopter slowed and began its descent toward the insertion point, a small clearing approximately 1 kilometer from the target compound. Jake could see the compound in the distance, a cluster of buildings surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Ropes out, the crew chief called. One by one, Jake's team fast roped down to the ground. Sarah went third in the sequence, her descent smooth and controlled despite the heavy medical pack on her back. As soon as her boots hit the ground, she was moving to her designated position in their tactical formation. The team moved through the rocky terrain toward the compound, using natural cover and staying low to avoid detection. Jake monitored their progress through his night vision scope, noting guard positions and potential escape routes. They were 500 meters from the compound when everything went wrong. The explosion came from their left flank, close enough to throw dirt and rocks across their position. Jake immediately recognized the sound. They had triggered an improvised explosive device. IED. IED, Williams shouted over the comm. Rodriguez is down. Jake's heart sank as he saw Rodriguez lying motionless 20 meters away, his leg clearly damaged by the blast. This was exactly the scenario Sarah had lived through before. A mission going sideways with wounded teammates in a hostile environment. Sarah, we need you on Rodriguez now, Jake called out. But when he looked for Sarah, she was frozen in place, staring at Rodriguez's still form with wide eyes. For a moment, that felt like an eternity. Jake thought she was going to have a complete breakdown. Then something changed in her expression. The fear didn't disappear, but it was replaced by something stronger. Professional determination. Sarah sprinted toward Rodriguez's position, staying low and using available cover. Jake watched in amazement as she transformed back into the elite soldier she had once been, moving with the same tactical awareness and precision that had kept her alive through 3 days of being hunted by enemy forces. She reached Rodriguez and immediately began assessing his injuries while automatic weapons fire began, crackling around their position. They were under attack, and Sarah was about to face the same nightmare that had haunted her for 8 months. Sarah's hands moved with automatic precision as she assessed Rodriguez's wounds, even as bullets cracked overhead. The IED blast had shattered his left leg below the knee, but she could see that the major arteries were intact. He was unconscious but breathing steadily. "Talk to me, Sarah," Jake called out from his position behind a boulder 15 meters away. "How bad is he?" "Compound fracture, severe trauma to the lower leg," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "He's stable for now, but I need to get him out of here soon." Williams was laying down suppressive fire toward the ridgeline where muzzle flashes indicated enemy positions. "We've got at least 6 shooters up there, maybe more. They've got us pinned down pretty good." Jake assessed their tactical situation grimly. They were caught in a kill zone with limited cover, 1 man down and enemy forces in elevated positions with clear fields of fire. It was a textbook ambush, and they had walked right into it. "This feels familiar," Sarah said quietly as she worked on Rodriguez's leg, applying pressure bandages and preparing a morphine injection. Jake caught the reference immediately. This was exactly the kind of situation that had killed her Delta Force team 8 months ago. "Sarah, I need you to stay focused on Rodriguez. We're going to get out of this." Sarah looked up at him, and Jake was surprised to see determination rather than fear in her eyes. "Jake, I know this terrain. I've studied every inch of this area since I've been at the base. There's a wadi about 200 meters to our east that leads back toward the extraction point." Williams paused his firing to look back at them. "How do you know about the wadi?" "Because I've been preparing for this," Sarah said simply, injecting Rodriguez with morphine. "Every mission briefing, every intelligence report, every topographical map. I've been studying this area because I knew eventually we'd be operating here." Jake felt a surge of respect for her professionalism. Even while dealing with her own trauma, Sarah had been preparing to support future missions. "Can we move Rodriguez through the wadi?" "If we can get him there," Sarah confirmed. "But we need to break contact with these shooters first." The enemy fire was intensifying, and Jake could hear voices calling out in Pashto from multiple directions. They were being surrounded. "Jake," Williams called out, "we've got movement on our right flank. They're trying to encircle us." Jake's mind raced through their options. They could call for close air support, but it would take time to arrive. They could request immediate extraction, but the helicopter would be vulnerable to ground fire. Or they could try to fight their way out, but that meant moving a wounded man through hostile territory. Sarah finished stabilizing Rodriguez and looked up at Jake. "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. I'm listening. I create a diversion while you and Williams move Rodriguez to the wadi. Draw their fire away from you." Jake shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. We don't leave anyone behind." "You're not leaving me behind," Sarah said firmly. "I know how to survive in hostile territory. I've done it before." "Sarah, your entire team died the last time you tried something like this." Sarah's expression hardened. "My team died because we were trapped in a building with no escape route. This is different. I know the terrain, I know where the extraction point is, and I know how to evade pursuit." Williams had been listening to their conversation while maintaining suppressive fire. "Doc, what kind of diversion are you talking about?" Sarah pointed toward a cluster of rocks about 50 meters to their north. "I moved to that position and engage the shooters on the ridgeline. Make them think the whole team is repositioning in that direction. While they're focused on me, you move Rodriguez through the dead ground to the east." Jake studied the terrain she was indicating. It was tactically sound, but it would put Sarah in extreme danger. "What's your extraction plan?" "I hold that position for 10 minutes. Then I move through the Wadi system and link up with you at the primary extraction point." Rodriguez stirred slightly and opened his eyes. "What's happening?" "We're getting you out of here," Sarah said gently, checking his pupils for signs of concussion. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," Rodriguez replied, though Jake could see he was struggling. "What's the plan?" Jake explained Sarah's proposal, and Rodriguez listened with growing concern. "Doc, that's incredibly risky. You'll be alone against 6 or more shooters." "I won't be engaging them directly," Sarah explained. "I'll be using movement and cover to make them think you're all still in that position." Classic misdirection. Another burst of automatic weapons fire forced them all to keep their heads down. Jake could hear the enemy forces getting closer on their right flank. They were running out of time to make a decision. "Jake," Williams said urgently, "if we're going to do this, we need to move now. They'll have us completely surrounded in another 5 minutes." Jake looked at Sarah, seeing the determination in her eyes. This wasn't the terrified survivor who had frozen up initially. This was the elite soldier who had fought her way through 3 days of enemy territory to survive. But he also knew that asking her to face this situation alone was asking her to relive her worst nightmare. "Sarah, are you absolutely sure about this?" She met his eyes steadily. "Jake, I've been carrying the weight of my team's death for 8 months. Every night I relive that mission and wonder what I could have done differently. This is my chance to save lives instead of watching people die." Jake realized that this wasn't just about tactical necessity for Sarah. This was about redemption, about proving to herself that she could still be the soldier she had trained to be. 10 minutes, Jake said finally. "You hold them for 10 minutes, then you get out of there." "That's an order." Sarah nodded and began preparing for her move. She checked her weapon, secured her medical pack, and took a deep breath. "Take care of Rodriguez. I'll see you at the extraction point." Williams looked at her with newfound respect. "Doc, you've got some serious steel. Give us 30 seconds to get Rodriguez ready to move." Sarah positioned herself for her sprint to the rocky outcropping, and Jake found himself hoping that this time, the ending would be different. This time, everyone was coming home. Sarah sprinted across the open ground toward the rocky outcropping, keeping low as bullets snapped through the air around her. She could hear Jake and Williams beginning to move Rodriguez in the opposite direction, their movement masked by the sound of her engaging the enemy positions. She reached the rocks and immediately began laying down precise, controlled fire toward the ridgeline. Her shots weren't meant to hit specific targets, but to convince the enemy that the entire team had repositioned to her location. She fired from different positions among the rocks, creating the illusion of multiple shooters. The ruse worked. The enemy fire shifted toward her position, giving Jake and Williams the cover they needed to move Rodriguez toward the wadi. Sarah could hear their movement through her earpiece as they half-carried, half-dragged Rodriguez across the broken terrain. "We're moving," Jake's voice crackled through her comm. 2 minutes to the wadi. Sarah continued her deception, moving between firing positions and varying her rate of fire to simulate the patterns of multiple operators. Her Delta Force training served her well. She had conducted similar diversions during her special operations career. But this time felt different. Instead of the crushing fear and desperation she had experienced during her team's final mission, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm. She was in control of the situation, executing a plan rather than reacting to catastrophe. "We're in the wadi," Williams reported. "Rodriguez is stable and mobile. Beginning movement toward extraction." Sarah checked her watch. She had been in position for 6 minutes, holding the enemy's attention while her teammates escaped. Now came the dangerous part, her own extraction. The enemy fire was intensifying as more fighters arrived at the scene. Sarah could hear vehicles approaching from the north, and she knew that staying in her current position much longer would be suicide. "I'm beginning my extraction," she reported over the comm. "Moving to Rally Point Alpha." Sarah took a deep breath and sprinted from the rocks toward the wadi system. Immediately, the enemy fire shifted to follow her movement. Bullets cracked past her head as she dove and rolled into the depression that marked the beginning of the wadi. The wadi was deeper than it had appeared from a distance. Providing good cover as she moved toward the extraction point, Sarah began working her way through the rocky channel, using her knowledge of the terrain to navigate the twisting passages. Behind her, she could hear the enemy forces spreading out to search for her team. Their voices carried across the desert air, angry and frustrated at having their prey escape. Sarah smiled grimly as she continued moving. The diversion had worked perfectly. 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the Wadi system near the extraction point to find Jake, Williams, and Rodriguez waiting in a defensive position. Rodriguez was conscious and alert, though clearly in pain despite the morphine. "How's our patient?" Sarah asked, immediately moving to check Rodriguez's condition. "Stable," Jake replied, but Sarah could hear the relief in his voice. "Extraction is inbound. ETA 5 minutes." Sarah began a fresh assessment of Rodriguez's injuries, checking his vital signs and adjusting his bandages. The bleeding had stopped and his color was good. He would need surgery to repair the fracture, but he was going to be fine. "Doc," Rodriguez said weakly, "that was some impressive shooting back there. Where did you learn to run a diversion like that?" Sarah met his eyes and smiled. "Same place I learned to treat combat injuries. Sometimes the skills overlap." The sound of approaching helicopters filled the air, and Jake began marking their position with an infrared strobe. 2 Blackhawks appeared over the ridgeline, one designated for medical evacuation, and the other providing escort and fire support. As the medical helicopter touched down, Sarah coordinated Rodriguez's loading with the flight medic. Her movements were efficient and professional, but Jake noticed something different about her demeanor. The tension that had defined her for months seemed to have lifted. She looked like a soldier who had finally made peace with her past. "Outstanding work today," Jake said as they prepared to board the escort helicopter. "All of it. The medical care, the tactical planning, the diversion. Rodriguez is alive because of you." Sarah secured her equipment and looked back toward the compound where they had been ambushed. "Jake, I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "For 8 months, I've been afraid that I was broken, that losing my team had somehow made me less than what I used to be." She turned to face him. "Today proved that wrong. I'm still the same person I was before. The skills are still there, the instincts are still sharp. I just needed to trust myself again." Williams overheard the conversation and nodded approvingly. "Doc, you proved today that once a warrior, always a warrior. Doesn't matter if you're carrying a rifle or a medical bag." As their helicopter lifted off and began the flight back to base, Sarah found herself thinking about her fallen teammates for the first time in months, without feeling crushing guilt. She had honored their memory today by saving lives and completing the mission. That was what they would have wanted. Jake watched Sarah during the flight and realized that something fundamental had changed. The broken survivor who had arrived at their base months ago was gone, replaced by someone who had integrated her past experiences into a new sense of purpose. Back at the base, as Rodriguez was taken into surgery and the team began their post-mission debriefing, Colonel Martinez pulled Jake aside. "I heard what happened out there," the colonel said. "Dr. Chen's actions were exemplary. She saved your teammate's life and probably saved your entire team." Jake nodded. "She's remarkable, sir. I'd be honored to have her as part of our team permanently." Colonel Martinez smiled. "Funny you should mention that. I just received word that Dr. Chen has been offered a position with a Special Operations Medical Unit. Combat medic with special mission capability. She'd be doing exactly what she did today, but as her primary assignment." Jake felt a mix of pride and sadness. She'd be perfect for that role. "When does she deploy?" "That's up to her. The offer is open-ended, contingent on her accepting the position." Later that evening, Jake found Sarah in the medical facility, cleaning and reorganizing her equipment. She looked up as he approached, and he could see a peace in her eyes that had been absent since the day they met. "I heard about the job offer," Jake said. Sarah nodded. "Colonel Martinez briefed me an hour ago. Special Operations Medical Support Unit. It would mean going back to the teams full-time. Are you going to take it?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then smiled. "Jake, today I remembered who I used to be. But more importantly, I figured out who I want to become. I want to be the person who saves lives in impossible situations. Whether that's with a special operations team or in a field hospital, I want to be where I can make the biggest difference." Jake smiled back. "Sounds like you found your answer." Sarah looked around the medical facility, then back at Jake. "I have. And for the first time in 8 months, I'm not afraid of it." As Jake left the medical facility that night, he reflected on the remarkable transformation he had witnessed. Dr. Sarah Chen had arrived at their base as a wounded survivor, carrying the guilt of her fallen teammates and trying to escape her past. But through facing her fears and trusting in her abilities, she had rediscovered not just her skills but her purpose. Tomorrow, Sarah would begin preparing for her new assignment with the Special Operations Medical Unit. She would return to the dangerous world of special operations, But this time she would go back whole, healed, and ready to honor her fallen teammates by saving the lives of others, the broken medic, who had once been too afraid to let others help her, had become the fearless warrior healer who would dedicate her life to ensuring that other soldiers made it home safely. It was, Jake thought, exactly the kind of redemption that made all the dangers and sacrifices of military service worthwhile. Some wounds heal stronger than they were before they were broken. Sarah Chen was living proof of that truth.